Education webinar. My name's Catherine Gorta. I'm the Community Legal Education and Engagement Coordinator here at Legal Aid. Apologies for being off screen. I would just like to start with an acknowledgement of country. Legal Aid Queensland acknowledges and respects the First Nations custodians of the lands where our office stands, and we're in Meanjin today, Brisbane, and where we work to help disadvantaged Queenslanders uphold their legal rights in our justice system. We pay respect to their elders, law, customs and creation spirits, and we recognise that these lands have always been places of ceremony, teaching, research and learning, and we acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play in our community and in improving our legal system. So welcome to today's webinar. Today's topic is, what are my clients' legal rights after a disaster? And joining me today to present this webinar, I have Paul Holmes, Director of our Disaster Relief Program, and Julie Marin, a lawyer both from our Civil Justice Services Division here at Legal Aid Queensland. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for making the time to be here today. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick off with the content today. The webinar is being recorded and the laws and content are accurate as of today. This information shared is not intended to be legal advice, it's legal information only. Should you have any technical issues with your sound or anything with the webinar today, unfortunately we can't provide that assistance. You will need to contact GoToWebinar's customer support for technical help. We've given you a little bit of extra time for today's webinar. This is a really popular topic every year, so we've got a 15-minute extension. That gives Paul and Julie plenty of time to talk through case studies today, 55 minutes, and we're allowing about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please, if you have any questions you'd like to ask Paul and Julie, feel free to send them through during the webinar. There's a questions box that you can type them into, and we'll ask them on the go. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end after their content. There are 2 handouts available to be downloaded. There's a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today, and a great list of top 10 tips. That's a tongue twister. Paul and Julie have put together for you guys. We'll also send a copy of both handouts out with the recording link after the webinar today. And you can download those handouts via the handout link on your screen. We have quite a few polls to get through because we want to know about who you are in our audience today and what your level of existing knowledge is about our services, and if you're currently helping people with any disaster legal issues. So I'll get those started now. The very first poll we have is finding out what region you're joining us from today, and I'll just launch that for you and you'll be able to start answering. So there's 4 answer options: Southeast Queensland, Far North Queensland, Regional Queensland and outside of Queensland. And given the spate of disasters across Queensland, you know, it's great to see if we've got people joining us from some of the affected areas today.
Shout out to those people in North Queensland where it's raining again.
Yeah.
As part of what's been a fairly active monsoon.
Yeah, just a couple more seconds and we'll close that one and share the results. Okay, so joining us today, we've got 55% from Southeast Queensland, we've got 27% from outside of Queensland, we've got 14% regional Queensland and 4% from Far North. So welcome everybody. I'm going to move on to our next poll.
And I should say just at that point, those people outside of Queensland, if there's Queensland specific law, we'll make that very clear.
Yeah, thanks Paul. Okay, I'll hide that one. Now going to our next poll, we're asking, what is your role? It's really helpful to know who's in the audience today. So the options are support worker, financial counsellor, health education worker, social worker, lawyer or other. And we'll just give you a couple of seconds for this one. Right now, it looks like financial counsellors or health education workers are our largest category at almost 50%. I'll just do a couple more seconds and close that off. Okay, and okay, so financial counsellors, 45% of who's joining us today. Great to have you. We've also got 23% lawyers, 5% social workers, 27% other. So welcome, welcome to all. And moving on to our next poll. So we're wanting to know, what is your experience with people recently impacted by disaster? And I'll just launch that new poll to share the answer options. So the answer options are: I'm currently helping people who've been impacted by disaster, have previously helped people, have some knowledge of the sector but no experience helping people, I've been impacted by disaster or other people, or no experience. More seconds for this one. And thank you for helping us by filling out these polls. It's just so helpful for Paul and Julie to tailor some of their case studies to be relevant for you all. Okay, I'll close that off and share those results. So about 33%, a third of our attendees are currently helping people impacted by disasters. And 38% I've previously helped people impacted. 16% have some knowledge, and 9% have been impacted. 5% no experience. Okay.
Excellent. Well, welcome to everybody.
Okay, I think this is our last one. I'll just bring up that one. Oh no, we have two more. Sorry, second last. This second last poll is: how much experience do you have helping people experiencing legal issues after a disaster? So none. I've helped some people. I've helped many people. This is now what has been my core responsibility. Okay, just a few more seconds. Close that one. So about 50%, none, no experience. So good to know. 36% have helped some, 10% have helped many people, and 5% this is now has been my core role. So that's
perfect.
Great to know.
Great mix of people there.
Okay, we've got one more poll. Last one, we promise. And I'll just launch the poll for you now. So did you attend or watch last year's webinar? Like, as I said, this is a really popular topic. And the answer options are yes, no, not sure, or how could I forget George, Wednesday and Mo, who are in our case studies, and how are they going now? So I would love to know if you tuned in last year as well.
This is how we pick up the disaster law tragics that are coming back for a second.
Okay, I'll close that off and share. So 5% attended last year. We've got 80% new people. So that's great. Thank you. That's fantastic. 30% not sure. Well, hopefully everyone there will get something out of it. And unfortunately, no one did.
Nobody remembers George.
But that's all right. Maybe they're just special class. Okay, all right. Well, now
you won't be bored when we talk about them again.
I'll move on to the next slide.
Let's get into the teeth of it.
Let's get on to it. So what we'll learn today: what are some of the legal issues people have after disaster? What about after another disaster has impacted the clients? What rights do consumers have when faced with these issues? And how can lawyers assist clients with these issues? So I'm going to hand over to Paul and Julie now. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. So, Julie, I guess what we thought we'd do is, before we delve too deeply into insurance, because everybody assumes disasters are all about insurance.
Yeah.
It was important to go through all the other legal issues we see when we're helping people with insurance.
That's right. Well, we're lawyers. We help you with the law stuff. And like you say, it's not just insurance. So some of the more typical legal issues that we see after a disaster, either caused by having been through a disaster or made worse by the disaster, are things like your personal loans, your credit cards, your mortgages, your home loans, because the disaster's just ruined your house. You're in a bit of a financial pickle with what you can afford to rebuild, and financial hardship with paying all of your other debts that you've already got, financial hardship with your utilities and your rates.
So let's just explore that a little bit, because it's not just a house we're talking about with loans, are we?
No, so you could have your car loan, you can have personal loan that you've taken out for whatever reason, you can have credit cards, you can also have those smaller buy now, pay later, afterpay type loans, the whole range of.
And all of those loans subject to the credit law?
So, yes, but buy now, pay later has only just been subject to the credit law since June last year. There is still a small category of small amount loans that, in my view, are quite predatory, wage advances and other non-regulated debt, but most consumer credit is regulated under the credit code, which means there are options for financial hardship and there are obligations on the lenders to comply with their responsibilities.
And so if somebody's been through a disaster, it's always important to remember that help's available with all of that sort of credit, isn't it?
That's right. So a disaster is the quintessential short-term, unexpected, not forever sort of situation that will come up that will vary your circumstances to what position you're in when you got the loan, and the bank or the lender is required to give you some sort of a variation to your contract terms so you can hold off on repayments or make smaller amounts of repayments, because your circumstances are going to get better when you get out the other end of recovering from this disaster.
But I guess it's also important to say at that point, though, that recovery could take a year or two.
It could take quite a while, but it's still not forever.
No.
It is still
And you still have the rights.
that will come back and change. So there's no definition of what short-term hardship is, or no set time period for a short-term hardship. We often see banks advertising after a disaster, which is great for awareness for people to know that there's options, but we can give you a 4-week hold on your mortgage. And well, that's great, but if you need longer than that, you're allowed to ask for that. And if you get told no, you're allowed to ask again.
And you're allowed to seek help from either us or community legal centres or financial counsellors.
That's right. And so there's dispute resolution processes that, again, the banks and the lenders all have to be a part of. That's part of the rules of getting to profit off lending us money, that they have to go through these processes as well.
A little bit different for utilities and rates though, isn't it?
It is. So particularly with rates, with local councils, they've got a special set of rules under the Local Government Act, but they would usually all have some hardship policy from council. And so you can explore that directly. It will be on council's website. Utilities, again, they have their own rules or their own hardship programs. And the enforcement or the complaints mechanisms are a little bit different for both of those, but there are still things that you can do if you get told no.
Yeah, and they're worth pursuing, but it's also worth remembering those rights are not the same as if it's a credit product.
That's right.
And people often assume, because I can get that from the bank, I can get the same thing from my council or my utilities company. That's simply not the case, is it?
No, that's right. Yes.
All right.
So any more about that?
Yeah, I think we've covered that as well as we can. Government grants are another interesting one.
Yeah, I find, you know, they're sort of the same every time there's a disaster or a significant weather event. There's going to be some federal grants come out and people will be eligible for it, some state government grants, but every disaster or significant event sort of has its own flavour.
Yep.
And just what you're eligible for or what the eligibility criteria for slightly changes a bit and depends on the area, if it's regional or metro.
And so it's always, I think my takeaway there is it's always worth asking questions.
Yeah.
Because unless you ask, can I access this? You don't know.
Yeah. When you say ask questions, does that mean you're going to ask your neighbours what they think, or who are you going to ask those questions of to make sure you get reliable info?
Big fan of, you will see people in recovery centres who are specifically there, often to help you fill out the paperwork to access
the logo on the t-shirt.
Yeah.
Not just the, oh, I heard that we can't get that.
Yeah, you go to the source and you ask them questions. Yeah. Employment's another good one. I don't propose to go too much into depth about that, but part of what's caused by that is often businesses will go underwater. And people could get fired, or they could be told don't come in for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Always worth checking into your rights there, isn't it?
That's right. Or your road that is between you and your place of employment could be underwater, and so if you can't physically get into the office, what are your rights there? So we can't tell you in every situation what your rights are, hypothetically, but you will have rights, and it's always worth getting some legal advice about them. Yes, the thing with employment is to exercise or enforce your rights very, very tight time frames that sometimes we can't do anything about if we miss. So that's a bit of a flag to always look at the employment side of it as well, as soon as you
Absolutely.
can.
Tenancy is another big issue with everybody renting, of course. I'll give a shout out there to our colleagues at Tenants Queensland, who are the experts in Queensland about all of those sort of issues. And they have particularly some great fact sheets on their website around rights after flooding and rights after disaster. So I'd recommend all of those to you. And I'd recommend, if you've got tenancy issues, contacting them because they're the experts.
Absolutely. And it's about making sure you know what your rights are.
Yep.
And I guess the last bit that we've got on this list of typical legal issues, maybe we should have put this at the start, family and domestic violence is everywhere. And it will be one of the legal issues that we see either caused by a disaster or made worse by a disaster, but it's always in the mix there, and something for us as the helpers and the financial counsellors and the other community lawyers to be aware of. That might be something that you've got going on there.
And the caveat I put there is the first consideration there before any legal issues in that space is making sure the person's safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, you know, these are the typical legal issues we see.
Well, that's slide one of the typical.
So these are the typical legal issues. The next one, not so often what we see, but what we see is also affected by where the disaster is. Is it in a regional area that's more likely to have farmers? Is it in a lower socioeconomic area that's more likely to have tenants? Is it in an area that gets disaster events every year and is prepared for it, or knows what's going on?
Yeah.
And what were the weather conditions preceding it? What sort of disaster was it? So every disaster is going to be a bit different for us and have different things to focus on. It's not just, oh, disaster, here's what we look at.
Yeah, so, and I guess on this slide, covering, the reason we've got Bailman up there, for those who don't know, is 2022 floods in Brisbane. One of the areas that went underwater had, over a weekend, had numerous car mechanics there. And so you saw companies who didn't necessarily have flood insurance have people's cars be severely damaged under their care. And one of the ways that was approached was by arguing that they have those cars on bailment, which presents that they have some specific rights, some specific responsibilities to look after those cars. So that's something, if you encounter that, worth getting some specific legal advice around how to pursue that through. In Queensland, QCAT would usually be the place to go, and in other states it'd be your equivalent tribunal.
It's always fun when there's a real specific lawyery legal issue, but there's other legal issues that we come across. Last year in the Far North Queensland floods, came across some consumer law issues where some products that people bought to replace their damaged contents didn't work. And so that's just a consumer issue about the product not meeting its consumer guarantees. So these are the issues that we see with or without a disaster, but it's again something that can come up after a disaster.
Yeah, small businesses are always affected by disasters. It's unfortunate there's not really funding lawyer-wise to help small businesses in that space, which makes it difficult. There are some small business financial counsellors who do some great work, yes. But in the lawyer space, that's a gap.
It is, but the small business financial counsellors are amazing.
Yep.
At what they do.
Particularly in the most recent Queensland floods, farms and rural small businesses have been badly affected.
Yes.
One of the challenges in that space is it's difficult to get insurance.
Yes, and then there's issues of flood cover. Have you opted out of flood cover? Are the paddocks covered or just the house covered? How much of the fencing from the house is covered? There's all the specific farm insurance cover.
And leaving aside the legal issues for a minute, the simply heartbreaking nature of having to dispose of cattle and other stock that's been affected in the disaster often has a big effect on farmers that we shouldn't underestimate.
We're seeing a lot on our TVs in Queensland, what's happening in central Queensland.
And far northern and western Queensland in that space. Sadly, scams are always an issue following disasters. It's just a question of which scam some nefarious people decide to come up with.
Yeah, there's scams everywhere, and it seems like they stay one step ahead of the regulations and the awareness, but yeah, there will be scammers and they will.
If somebody knocks on your door and they haven't been sent by the insurer, be wary is my usual advice.
Yeah, so we saw this last year in Far North Queensland in some of the smaller towns that where people go once they've retired from work, and the door knocking and the trust that comes from, oh, this bloke's here to look at the roof, must be from the insurer. And,
Not always the case.
yeah, so there's some risks there.
Touching briefly on discrimination, part of the reason I wanted to put that there is people have sought help in the past who might have a disability, and let's say a recovery centre or where they're able to go that's safe doesn't necessarily accommodate all their needs.
I have not seen that myself, but that is a good thing to put on our list. Yeah, that there's just no reps, or there is no awareness of the need for accessibility.
Yeah, and that's not pointing fingers at anybody. That's just something as a society we all have to get better at.
And it's just something for us to keep an eye out for after disasters as a possible legal issue we can see. We've got also social security there for people who are already in receipt of a Centrelink income. Not meeting your job participation requirements might be an issue that comes up, or if you've lost your job, you might need to go on to a job seeker or a Centrelink income payment.
And sometimes the grants are paid via.
That's right, through the Centrelink services. Yeah.
Yep. And then finally, the last two, there are always going to be family law issues following a disaster because, for example, you might not be able to meet custody arrangements because you can't get the kids to the venue or to the ex's house.
Just the access for transport, that's right. Or the issues that you had before the disaster blow up and become a separation or become a need for a property settlement after the disaster. And then when you've got co-insureds with a property settlement, that can just complicate things, of course.
And then finally, criminal law. Sadly, following disasters, there are often people charged with things like looting.
Yeah, and it's just something that comes up because of or after or around a disaster, but they're all legal issues that Legal Aid Queensland and community legal centres can assist people with within that broader disaster context.
Framework. Yes. All right, let's delve more deeply into some insurance stuff.
All right, so I'm a bit disappointed for George Jetson, our first case study, that none of you all remember him from last year. We put so much work into his case study last year, and I didn't want to bore anyone with repeating it. But what we can tell you about George Jetson, last year's webinar, go back and watch it, it's a peach. But we looked at George and his family who had been impacted by Cyclone Donald, and how we went with seeing George at the recovery centre in central Queensland after his home had been massively damaged by the cyclone, and so much so they couldn't live there, they couldn't live in the town. His wife and kids had to move to Brisbane to have somewhere safe to live. And so when we saw George, he had all sorts of issues going on after this disaster. He had issues with the temporary accommodation not being suitable. I think when we talked to him, he was in a tent on the property. And like we said, the wife and kids had moved. His insurance claim had been part declined because of what the insurance company said was a lack of maintenance on his roof. But George had had a roof report done just 3 weeks before the cyclone. So he had some evidence showing that lack of maintenance was not a thing. He was being really pressured by his insurer to agree to their really low cash settlement offer. I think we had a cash settlement offer of $50,000 where it would be $200,000 to repair all of the damage. And then poor old George, it just keeps getting worse for him. His car was one of those cars that was at the mechanics during the event. It was damaged. Now he's got no car, can't get to work.
So what you would do.
What we would do and what we have done is with the insurer's decision, we help George challenge the insurer's decision. So any decision that an insurance company makes on your insurance policy, if you don't agree with their decision, It doesn't have to be the final decision on a claim. It can be any decision that they make. You can ask them to review it. That's the IDR acronym there, Internal Dispute Resolution.
And just while we're on that, are you likely to get any change in an IDR decision if
Now,
you just say,
You
I
sound skeptical.
no, wait for me. If all you do is say, I disagree.
Oh gosh, no, that's ridiculous. Look, I wouldn't rule it out altogether. It's possible because the part of the insurance company that looks at that should be separate from the claims department. So it should be a separate person looking at it. It's possible looking at all the same information, they will make a different decision, but it's not really very likely.
Okay, so how are we going to help ourselves? What are we looking for?
You give them the information that supports your case or you give them the reason why they should change it. And in particular with George's one, and anybody who's got a lack of maintenance decline, I find these ones so infuriating. But the insurer in that case is relying on an exclusion in your policy that they don't have to cover your claim because they've excluded damage where there's a lack of maintenance. So they're relying on an exclusion, they have to prove it. You can give them the information that you have. Like George had the roof guy at his house 3 weeks before, he's got a report that shows that the roof was well maintained. Hand that over and get them to have a look at that and get them to go again. But if you're not as lucky as George was with that, you don't have to have your own report. You can give them all the information that you've got about the condition of your roof, when you've done things, how well maintained it is. But also you look at, well, even if there was a lack of maintenance to the roof, how did that impact whether it's covered or not?
Yeah, and that's the story that sometimes if there's 200 km/h winds coming through, there's damage happening regardless, often.
That's right. And that's the speed of wind that can unscrew a cyclone screw. I learned last year helping somebody after Cyclone Jasper. So it doesn't matter if the roof had some foot traffic dents on it, if that's not where the water got in and that's not how the roof was damaged by the wind-driven rain and the winds that
They're questions you need to ask of your insurer.
That's right. And
I guess the other thing to talk about in that space though too is you can look for stuff outside of what you know that can sometimes be helpful. Okay. Well, and I'll move it to flood just as an example. It's very rare one of your neighbours hasn't put up video on your Facebook page of when and how the water came into a property.
That's right.
Or even, I'm aware of in some cases, CCTV has been used to show when properties flood.
Yeah.
And then they're not things I don't think that people would ordinarily think about that they could use to help an insurer in making the decision.
That's right.
But all of that sort of information is really relevant.
That's right. It supports your case of this is what happened on that day. This is how this damage was caused. If all of the news reports that day were footage of the winds whipping through your suburb, through your street, that's evidence that that's what happened.
And just be really careful when you look at reports about wind and in an insurance context. Sometimes those wind readings that are done at weather stations might actually be a fair way away from your property.
Yeah. So in Hervey Bay, there is a street, a block back from the beach where the wind comes from this way from the ocean and this way from the mountains, and it whips around and you can have wind damaging homes on this side but not damaging homes on that side. And a weather station 4 kilometres away isn't
going to reflect that. So while that's useful information, your direct experience of what you saw, what you heard, all is relevant information to that decision about whether you're covered or not.
That's right. And it is, when we say it's useful and it's relevant, it's useful and relevant for you to include in your request to the insurance company to review their decision. But then it's also very useful and relevant for you to use if they do affirm their own decision and don't change their mind, even after you've given them more information, then you can go to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, AFCA, for some external dispute resolution, or EDR.
Yeah, and they play an important role in, I look on them, and I'm a sports nut, people know that. I look on them a bit like the third umpire in cricket.
of the video room.
Yeah, because they view all the information from both
Can we have a
sides.
look at the other angle? Just slow it down a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So they look at all of it and then make a definitive decision.
that's right. So in lawyer talk and not sports nut talk, AFCA is my favourite jurisdiction as a lawyer because they look at not just what the law says and what the contract says, which is what you're going to get at a court or a tribunal, but they also look at what the good industry practice is, which is evidenced in the General Insurance Code of Practice, and what's fair and reasonable in all the circumstances. So I've seen AFCA determinations say, well, it's not fair that the insurer should have to pay for that because that's not in the policy. But I've also seen AFCA determinations say, well, it's fair that the insurer should have to cover an additional period of temporary accommodation because they caused a delay. Or they look at what's fair and reasonable in the circumstances.
Yeah. Now, Julie, I'm sensing Mother Nature is about to be mean to George again.
So we live in Queensland. I haven't lived up here very long, but oh my goodness, the weather. And the weather just keeps on coming. So what we've got for George is what happens next. Now we have just jumped over a bit, but let's just get to
what happens next.
What happens
a couple
next.
of slides along.
Okay.
So this is
This one?
something
Yep.
that happens up here, that 11 months after Cyclone Donald, George and his family are impacted again by Cyclone Daisy. So I just can't get used to the frequency of major weather events up in Queensland. But this is something
This
that
is common.
this has happened in Far North Queensland. February 2025 had a severe weather event just recently, not significant enough, but just recently they had enough rain for some people to go again.
And I'll highlight Mount Tamborine as an example for people up there.
Yeah.
I think it's like 3 or 4 events in 2 or 3 years.
Well, I think when you get to live in such beautiful nature and surrounds, you cop a bit of that as well. So we wanted to talk about what our clients' rights are after another disaster, after it happens again, before the recovery is finished from the first one.
Yeah. So what we're saying is George isn't fixed yet.
Yeah.
And he's affected again.
He's still not back home yet, but he is still insured. And we got him to the point where AFCA said, yep, the insurance company has to fix his house. So they're still in the process of fixing his house. And now there's been another disaster. So more damage has been done to bits of the home that haven't been finished or been repaired, or have been and have now gone again. And so in this case study, we've got George, who just really wants his wife and kids back. He doesn't want to be in a tent. He wants the temporary accommodation to pay for a caravan. And we've also got in this case study circumstances where George has signed up with a claims management company called We Solve Claims at a community barbecue put on to help the community 2 days after the cyclone event.
So just to clarify, this is the second cyclone.
This is the second cyclone in less than a year.
Yep.
The repairs from last year's claim still aren't finished, and now there's more. And he doesn't have any contents cover for his stuff yet. He did have it last time, but all his stuff is still in a storage container sitting next to the tent.
Waiting for the house to be fixed.
He hopes it's all still in there. So another disaster. So let's have a look at
What can we do?
how we would help poor old George. Now, I'm not sure if you want to get started on temporary accommodation. Oh, I'm just going to get me.
It's a hobby horse of both of us, ours, I think. Look, I think the temporary accommodation one has become more and more difficult as timeframes for fixing houses have blown out due to, initially it was COVID, shortage of materials, shortage of appropriate accommodation, have all impacted this, making it very difficult, to be fair, for insurers and also for consumers who are looking for places to live.
That's right.
And it's particularly significant in regional areas.
That's right. In the country towns, in the towns up the coast, far north Queensland, there are only limited options already.
Yep.
Often the options that are already there are short stay holiday accommodation, which means they cost more and they can only be provided for up to a month at a time, or for short periods at a time. I think that
Can we just step this back one step, I reckon? Temporary accommodation, there's two potential clauses in a policy, isn't there?
so you can have, so your insurance policy will say where your home is damaged and unlivable, then you get as an additional benefit on top of your sum insured amount, cover for temporary accommodation. Now, it might be then, all the policies are worded slightly differently. It might be that the amount that you're entitled to is a percentage of the amount of your sum insured, 10%. And it might be capped at that 10% amount. It might be capped at a period of time for 12 months from the event, for 18 months from the event. And then it might also chuck in a few other attempted restrictions on, but it's also based on the rentable value of your home just before the disaster, which I think is a bit meaningless.
But I guess the focus though is when there's a shortage of accommodation, it becomes more expensive.
Yes. It might be that there already was not affordable accommodation options. I wouldn't say people jack up the price after a disaster.
But look, that's basic supply and demand. If houses get damaged, there's less
That's
houses, more demand, higher price.
I think what makes it really more difficult for consumers is not knowing how long it's going to take before you're back in your home.
Yep.
And so the period of time that you might need it for, you just don't know. People who live in areas that get hit often might have a bit more of an idea, and they might already have their caravan set up for it. But people who, we often see people who say, I've been with my insurer for 25 years, I've never made a claim. This is their first one. They've got no idea what to expect or what's going on. And then the length of time that it takes for you to get back in your house depends on how many other people need the tradies that are a limited, finite supply to do the fixing. How many other people need them and how long it's going to take. So a job that might take 4 months for the builders in circumstances where you're the only person with a claim might now take 2 years when it's 2,000 people in a town.
But it's not just that. There's often the problem that the nearest accommodation might be 100k away in regional Queensland.
Yes. And so that's where we saw with George last year having to split up his family because there was nothing there. I think you've talked about in the past the communities after the 2022 floods, who the community just changed its face because so many of the kids enrolled in the primary school had to move away
because there wasn't suitable accommodation nearby.
Their homes were rebuilt. So I think temporary accommodation for me 10 years ago used to be about making sure people knew it was an additional benefit and they weren't going to lose out on, you know, being able to rebuild all of their home. It was on top of, and making sure people knew about it, because you've got to use it or lose it. But now it's about, well, what is a suitable temporary accommodation option?
Yep.
So we've seen a lot more in just the last 12 or 24 months, people wanting to use the temporary accommodation benefit in their insurance policy to buy a caravan so that they can have something certain, something at their house, their kids can stay in the school.
And remain part of the community.
Remain part of the community, and then it doesn't matter how long it takes to fix the home, they've got the caravan.
Yep. And some insurers have been great in responding to those requests. And some have struggled.
Some have struggled. And I think what I would like to see happen with temporary accommodation is that it's in every insurance policy that I've seen that you are entitled to extra cover for temporary accommodation. I would like the insurance companies to take a more customer focused view of what each claimant's needs are, that they're providing a temporary accommodation option that is safe, suitable, secure and certain. I didn't mean that to be so, but that that if you know the home's going to take 6 months to rebuild, put people into long-term residential rental options, not month-by-month short stay Airbnb where they have to move from one to another, because the trauma of the disaster and the challenges in recovery from a disaster are made so much more difficult unnecessarily.
Where you're moving every month.
Where you're moving every month. And I do think that it is within the scope of just about all of the policies that I've seen, all the different insurance companies, for them to take this sort of individual approach to what the temporary accommodation should cover and what should be reasonable. So somebody can get all of their temporary accommodation, the 10% of their sum insured right at the start to buy a caravan, even if you don't know for sure how long it's going to take, because you know it's going to take a while.
And that's the reality.
Yeah.
And I guess the other point to talk about in this space is look at the vulnerabilities that the customer might have.
That's right. So it's
As
not,
an example, they might have an assistance dog.
that's right.
And getting temporary accommodation that doesn't allow pets.
So apart from the discrimination claims with hotels not letting them in there, but you know, you might have your pets who are really important parts of your family, or you might have physical or mental disabilities that mean what you need is different from what would usually be provided. And so then I think I would like to see insurance companies looking at not just rentable value of the home before, or what it costs is reasonable. I would like them to look at, well, what are you covered for, and what do you need?
What fits you?
What fits you, that's right. And the General Insurance Code of Practice does require insurers to, you know, consider and respond sensitively to their customers' vulnerabilities, and I would suggest this is a really good way that they can do that.
Agreed. Catherine, just checking out, are there any relevant questions?
We've had one question come through, and that is, what happens if the supplier did not do a high quality job, or the insurance states that it was not up to standard, but the builder says the opposite?
The supplier of like
Of the work.
Of the work.
So
yeah.
I'm assuming we're talking under an insurance claim that's been approved?
Yes, that's, I believe that's the context, yes.
Okay. So my reaction to that is the insurer should be requiring you to sign off that you're happy with the work.
yeah.
And no, but that's your right.
That's right. But even if you don't sign it off, or even if it's fine now and later it's not,
That's back to the insurer.
it's back to the insurer. Where the insurer has engaged the tradespeople to do the work, then in just about every policy I've seen, the insurer takes responsibility for the quality of that work.
And that's one of the advantages of the insurer doing the work rather than getting a cash settlement, isn't it?
That's right. So in, I think just about every policy I've seen, the insurer offers a lifetime repairs guarantee. So if the works are defective, you just go back to the insurer, they're going to get it taken care of. You don't have to go through the Queensland Building Commission process or go through a tribunal, or you don't have to deal with the builder yourself.
Whereas if you took a cash settlement and you're just dealing with the builder.
Yeah, so you're the project manager with the hard hat, and you're dealing with all of the issues that come up later, which I think for a lot of people would be much easier and probably much healthier and safer to put that responsibility back onto the insurer.
I agree with that.
That's the only question so far.
Cool. Keep sending questions through to us. We're happy to talk amongst ourselves, but if there's questions out there about what we're saying.
Send through questions, then we can hear from Catherine as well. That's just a different voice to hear.
All right, next thing we want to talk about are claims management companies.
So, Paul, tell us, what is a claims management company?
Look, I think the first thing to say is they are now required to have a license,
That's right.
and so are required to be members of AFCA.
That's right.
And that's a really important starting point. But I think it's fair to say we probably see two different types of claims management companies. One is those who immediately following a disaster are very active in the community and very active in community Facebook groups.
Which is what George has got here, somebody in a branded van has rocked up.
And they basically promise to manage the claim, it won't be a problem.
Oh,
We'll get
insurance
you more money
companies, you don't want to go through that
them. You don't
yourself.
want to deal with that yourself. Yep, that's generally the sales pitch. It's not always, but that's generally the sales pitch. And then the second group tend to do door knocking maybe a year or two after a disaster. And I knock on the door and say, do you want me to check your roof for damage? And I'm yet to see a client who didn't have roof damage to somebody knocking on the
That's
door.
right. And, you know, with the sales pitch of, you know, just a little bit of hail, just a few dents of hail up there, and that it'll rust out and your whole roof will collapse, and then where will you be? So it's a bit of scaremongering.
And those contracts we're seeing are a bit interesting, to put it politely, because they'll often have clauses in them saying you agree to take a cash settlement, you agree to use our builder.
We won't tell you that our trusted, reputable builder is a company that we own.
And if you don't use our builder and you get the insurer to do it, you'll still have to pay somewhere, we've seen anywhere between 5 and 20%.
The biggest one I've seen has been 55%.
Jeez.
But usually, you know, between 10 and 20%
of the value of the claim.
or, you know, just what we think possibly it would have been if you had to let us keep going.
So you're paying more than it would cost to fix the roof in some cases, or
That's right.
half of.
And so you can't actually afford them to get the work done if you decide not to let their builder do the repairs. And there could be a number of reasons why people would change their mind about that. But I think the very first reason is a lot of people that I have seen have not even realised they've signed a contract.
Yep.
They're given an iPad, it has click here, click here, click here, and they think that they are signing an authority form for this claims management company to talk to their insurance company.
Yep.
They have no idea about the contract. But then as it goes along, they might have issues with the claims management company over-promising, under-delivering, not returning calls, not doing what they said, concerns about, well, how am I going to be able to afford this? And so they withdraw from that purported
and then the fight
contract.
begins usually.
And then the fight begins. So what we've seen in Queensland is these claims management companies, and of course we're lawyers, we only see the bad ones, but what we have seen is claims management companies doing things like estimating the value of the claim, and weirdly it's always just so that the amount of the fee is just over the bankruptcy threshold, and then threatening to take you to court and making you bankrupt unless you pay them.
Or taking you to QCAT.
Or taking you to QCAT, because they've never lost in QCAT. So QCAT is the Queensland
and they're happy to tell us that they've never lost in QCAT.
So we see some really aggressive bullying tactics from these companies in trying to extract these termination or service fees from the people who signed up, who what we've seen is just vulnerable people, because who's home during the middle of the day and who didn't understand the contract and who are quite scared. So we've seen these companies take action against people in QCAT. What we have not seen is these companies let people know, hey, we've got this financial services license, so that means we have to be a member of AFCA. So that means you can go through that complaints process and it doesn't cost you anything, and AFCA will come up with a determination.
No, we haven't.
But we tell people that.
Absolutely, that's what we're there for. And I guess the other thing to say in this space is we need to remember that mental state people are in following a disaster.
That's right.
And I guess what I'd say about that is when you're under trauma, making what I would describe as difficult cognitive decisions about signing contracts, pursuing rights, it's actually really hard for people, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I don't want to get too geeky about it, but there's been research that it affects your prefrontal cortex. Having gone through a disaster event can affect your executive functioning in the same way that a brain injury from a car accident can. It's not permanent, but it can just make it so much more difficult for you to do all those things.
And if you're not clearly explaining stuff, my argument would be, how do you know the person has the legal capacity, in inverted commas, to agree to a contract?
That's right. But what we need to do is to get these complaints, or to get these cases into AFCA where they should be, so that they can help the customer and the claims management company come up with a fair outcome, rather than letting it go through a tribunal, which can be very daunting for somebody who has gone through all of that and who isn't going to look at any of the niceties of, or did they explain it to you properly? They're going to look at a signature on a contract and find that this is a liquidated debt that you owe. And sadly, we have seen some cases of that. But even then, it's not too late, so send them along to us for some advice.
Absolutely. And we're not saying QCAT's making the wrong decisions there.
No.
We're saying it's important for people to get into a process that's more consumer friendly.
That's right. And like we said before, when you're a financial firm providing a financial product, part of the obligation that comes along with being able to profit off that is that you have to do that in a way that includes these complaints resolution and providing it in a fair way to consumers.
And that's why AFCA's there.
That's right. What I struggle with the claims management companies, and poor old George, don't worry, we'll get him out of this one, but why do they exist? Why is there an opportunity for claims management companies to overpromise, to sign people up to manage their insurance claims for them?
Yeah, and there's probably two reasons I can think of there.
Yeah, what's your thoughts?
One is, I think it's still fair to say insurers need to continue working on their claims management and how they interact with consumers in that space.
Yeah.
Because rightly or wrongly, there's a lot of consumers out there that find the process of dealing with an insurer daunting and difficult.
And frustrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're offered somebody going, I'll make that all go away,
Let me do that for you.
they'll grab it.
That's right. But I think, you said there was two reasons.
I suspect you're going to tell me the second one.
Let me see if I can guess. I think the second reason is you don't have to pay a claims management company. You don't have to sign up to a potential 20% termination fee because there are financial counsellors, community legal centres and legal aid lawyers who will do it for free. Going to AFCA is free, making an insurance claim is free, getting legal advice, or
going to the IDR, Department of Insurance,
it's
is
all
free.
free. You shouldn't have to pay any money to go through a free process. But I think there's just not enough of us helpers to cover
To reach everywhere.
the need for people who need help.
That's certainly part of it.
That's right. So,
But I think this is a multi-solve approach where insurers continue to improve, we continue working to improve.
yeah. And if we can just make sure that people know that you can complain about these companies through AFCA, I think
Where they're
that's
doing the wrong thing, I think that's
more
a
than
big
half
step
the
forward.
work. That's right.
Absolutely.
So don't worry, we would definitely tell George about that.
Absolutely, we would.
So
Just
how are we going for time? Because like last week, we've only gotten through the first case study.
and we're not, all right, any questions while we're going?
We don't have any questions that have come through, so that's fine. In
Are they all
terms of
still
that, they're all still there, I promise you.
All right,
We have I can probably give you about another 10 minutes.
Okay.
before we jump to solely questions.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Wednesday.
Okay. So since we need to give you the short version, this is absolutely no indication of how important this case study is or the issues that we want to draw out of this case study. So I'll let you all have a read of it, but in short, it's about somebody whose home was impacted by a flood. They live in a larger area. The flood was quite a while ago. The claim's been approved, but the repairs aren't done and the repairs are dragging on, and our client doesn't understand what's going on. She doesn't understand what's in the scope of works. She doesn't understand the whole process. And there's probably a very good reason for that. She's not stupid. She was living in a domestic violence relationship even before the disaster happened. So I think we've got on the next slide a little bit more information about her situation that she, I don't know, maybe I cut it out in the summary. But yeah, so the property that was damaged by the disaster is jointly owned. There's a co-owner, there's a co-insured. But the co-owner, co-insured is not allowed to live in the property because of a domestic violence order. And what Wednesday wants to do about the house and the repairs and everything is sort of then enmeshed with the relationship with the
and it's worth saying to those outside of Queensland, each state calls that order something different.
That's right. But it's a domestic violence order or an apprehended violence order, an order from the court protecting her from any further violence, and so he has to stay away from the house. but he still owns it and he's still on the insurance policy.
Now, Wednesday wants to sell. And the husband's going, no. That's a bit of a problem, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's a bit of a problem. And look, in that case, I would refer that to a family law specialist, which I am not. But
For property settlement.
for property settlement, that's right. So, you can't be forced to continue to own a home with somebody that you don't want to continue to own. But in these circumstances, any financial product can be weaponized as a form of financial abuse, coercive control. A lot of the insurance companies that Paul and I deal with every day are well aware of this, have developed policies and have really good responses to it.
And a number have introduced a clause that what often happens is sometimes it's the perpetrator of the DV will actually cause the damage to the house.
Oh yeah, they might think they're not causing disasters though.
No.
But in terms of pre-existing damage or where the contents were or things that happened, could be because of the violence, but also just the claim progress or what outcome you want from the claim. So Wednesday might not want the home to be repaired. She might just want a cash settlement for the cost of what it would cost to repair it, so they can just sell the home as is and get out and not wait for the repairs to be done.
Yeah.
But
that's all of that's dependent on the family law resolution, that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing to say there though is remembering that there's these linking legal issues. You can't deal with an insurance issue in isolation.
No, that's right. It's always in the broader scope of everything else in their lives, but this one very obviously so. You need to make sure that the insurance company knows about it. I know some of them have really good systems and training and they will see the red flags themselves, but just in case they haven't, you need to make sure they know. You need to make sure they're not disclosing the location of temporary accommodation to the co-owner. You need to make sure that they know that it's reasonable for the temporary accommodation to be just for one of them, because that's the accommodation attached to the policy. And you need to make sure they know that the co-owner, co-insured does not speak for our client. And they can put that on there, but
really important stuff.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to the safety we're talking about.
That's right. And so there are code obligations in the General Insurance Code of Practice about vulnerability and doing the right thing. There's all the legal stuff around it, but the safety is the most important thing. You don't want to just sit back and wait for something to happen that we've got a legal answer for. Do what you can to make sure that they're safe.
And for example, this is something I want insurers to always think about. Asking somebody who's in temporary accommodation and is away from the property due to DV, we've seen instances where they've asked that person to go and visit the damaged property, which is in the same town as the person they investigate. Yeah. So just thinking about the practical aspects of that are really, really important, because that's not something you'd necessarily go, oh, we're just telling her to go to the house.
Yeah.
It's in the context of that person left that town for a reason.
Yeah. That's right. So I think our message to all the helpers, the financial counsellors and the community lawyers who are well versed in all of this is make sure the insurance company knows as well.
Yeah. And
our message for anybody else out there is, make sure that your staff who are dealing with people at risk of financial abuse through weaponization of a financial product, make sure your staff are trained properly so they can see it. Because it's not just about, we're lawyers, it's about your legal responsibilities, but it's about all of our moral responsibility to deal with this in our society.
Absolutely. And I guess the other issue here that is one that some insurers are dealing well with is what happens when your 12 months temporary accommodation is about to run out.
So, like I said, some will just extend it and that's great. Some will say, bad luck, off you go. What we would look at there was why has it run out already? Why wasn't it enough? Were there any delays in getting the repair started? Any delays in getting the drying out of the remediation? Was there any unreasonable decision to spend a lot of money on an accommodation option where you could have gone for a cheaper option? But we'll also look at the vulnerability of the clients. I saw the other day an insurance policy that says, words to the effect of, you're vulnerable. Even though we've got no legal obligation, we might pay you more than you're entitled to, even though we've got no legal obligation. Well, I'm definitely going to use that clause of that policy all the time. But it's about looking closely at the policy too to see, well, has it actually even run out yet?
Yeah, it's a good call. Now, I'm sensing we should look to questions, or are we still clear?
We do. We've got one more that's come through, and the question is, does AFCA have a list of good tradies and bad tradies?
Oh, do they?
No, sadly.
Oh, because I'd love such a list. Now, I have heard rumour that one of the not-for-profits kicking around somewhere does have such a list or can refer people somewhere. I have never seen such a list.
No, I've never seen such a list, but what I would say in that space is the people that have spent the time identifying good tradies are actually the insurers. They're the ones who've looked into what people do and put them on their panel. And if they're on their panel, that's the insurer accepting responsibility for their work.
Yeah.
And most insurers I know aren't going to accept responsibility for the work of somebody who's bad at it.
Oh, that's an excellent point.
Thank you. Well, we do have time for the third case study, if you're happy to jump to that one.
Yeah, we could talk about Mo, but we could also talk about something that's just reminded me of back with George's case.
Yeah.
Is this all right? About, because I think that it's always better to get the insurer to do the repairs rather than do a cash settlement,
Yeah.
except for if you're in Wednesday's situation and you want to move.
Yeah.
If this is the 18th time you've had a cyclone come through your house and you've just had enough, you want out, sure, get a cash settlement.
Common thing happens following bushfires. You can't possibly handle the prospect of it happening again. And I understand why.
That's right. Or you might be massively underinsured
Sure.
and can't afford to rebuild.
Yep.
Anyway, but what I'm interested in, or what we've seen a bit, is where the insurance company says, oh no, you have to take a cash settlement. We can't do these repairs because the repairs aren't warrantable. I would love you to start this one off.
Yeah, and look, that commonly happens where it's a partial approval, where there's an argument around there was some pre-existing damage and we can't do the repairs until you fix the pre-existing damage. And what I'd love insurers to do in that space, because sometimes they're validly saying that, is rather than just saying you need to go and fix it, actually give them a letter saying, for us to do our bit of the work, what you need to do is go and talk to this expert about repairing the following three things.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, what happens when people get those sort of letters, they throw up their hands and go, how am I supposed to know what to do next?
I feel for them because I don't know what they're supposed to do next. It's hard.
So to me, that's my ask in that space.
Yeah.
Leaving aside, we've already talked about lack of maintenance and your rights for exploring that. There are some cases where the property hasn't been maintained properly.
Yeah.
And in that case, I would love it if the insurers who are the experts in who needs to fix what actually told people, you need to go and see, I'll just say it, you need to go and see a carpenter to fix the following things, and you need to go and see a roofer to fix the following things. Once they're done, come back to us.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think it's also important not just to take for granted that it's correct.
Yep.
And if you're not sure, to ask, why does this need to be fixed for this to be warrantable? And then even worth going a little bit further and exploring, well, is fixing this fixing damage, or is fixing this bringing it up to code, or is fixing this something else that is covered by the policy anyway? So always worth looking a little bit further into it. But then if you are in the spot of, well, you have to take a cash settlement because the repairs aren't warrantable, ask what needs to be done for them to become warrantable, and be real specific. Because like you said before, insurance companies are much more knowledgeable about what it takes to fix a house than any of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good, it's a good use of the skills that insurers have to use to your benefit.
Yeah. Yes, to our benefit. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, I'm thinking.
So yes,
We've got a comment on that.
Yep.
That says, a lot of the time, if the repair is not warrantable, they offer a cash settlement for the work that was quoted.
Yeah. So I still think I would prefer for the work to be done rather than a cash settlement. So that's where we look at, well, what needs to be done elsewhere on the house to get it so that it can be warranted.
And I guess also in that space, there are people who doing that for various reasons, that like might be a physical impairment, mental illness, just won't be able to get it done.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that's another really important part of it.
Yeah, that's right. If you gave me a chunk of money and said, here you go, get some tradies to fix your house. No, I don't even know where to start.
Exactly. And we're in this space.
Yeah.
We're fairly knowledgeable about the space compared to the rest
Yeah.
of the population.
And then you're competing with everybody else in the area after a disaster. It's not just one house that goes.
Oh, but to be fair, the other reason to take a cash settlement, and I think you've seen cases like this too, is if your uncle's a builder.
Oh yeah, but if you're looking at taking a cash settlement because your uncle's a builder, make sure that you're taking a cash settlement that's based on
The market price.
what it cost a consumer to get the work done, not an insurance company, and make sure you ask for the cash settlement to include the amount of temporary accommodation benefits that you're entitled to and any other cleanup, removal of debris, anything else that's covered in your contract, and make sure that it covers 10 to 20% uplift for the transfer of risk, because you're taking on the risk of things not going well after you take that cash settlement, which would usually be the risk left with the insurance company taking care of the tradies and all the vicissitudes that might come up. So you ask for an uplift as well, and we see that added.
And I guess also linked in that space is it's not unusual for us to be working with a financial counsellor, a social worker, a health worker, all helping people through this process.
Oh, not only is it not unusual, it is my preference. We are just lawyers. We just know the law stuff. The support and the much better position our clients are going to be in for their health and their well-being and their recovery and getting back into their homes quicker is so much more increased when they have a financial counsellor, a support worker, a social worker, and other people supporting and wrapped around them. If we're just one part of it rather than the whole.
That holistic approach and wraparound service is really important.
That's right.
All right.
Well,
further questions?
There's hang on. There's no other further questions. Are we happy to move to the ones that we
Pre-thinking?
submitted
Absolutely.
before the webinar? So thank you to everybody who submitted webinar questions when you registered for the webinar. There's a couple that we will need to follow up directly with people, but these are the ones that we thought we'd cover today. So the first one is when ordering rental tenants to leave a property due to damage, is the owner obligated to provide housing to the renter?
We're just going to refer there to the experts we mentioned earlier, which is Tenants Queensland.
Yep, Tenants Queensland are the experts, and I would always check in with them any tenants questions after a disaster.
Absolutely.
Yep. Second question, is insurance responsible for finding temporary accommodation? Do insurance claim payouts have to be same as value assessed?
Okay, that's probably two parts to that one, isn't it?
I'm not sure if the two parts are related to each other, but we might go back to the asker directly. But the first part of the question, is an insurance company required to find you the temporary accommodation? So this comes up a lot after a disaster that impacts 1,100 homes in the town. How are you going to find somewhere to live? A lot of the insurance companies that we know of have sections or have accommodation. Yeah, they outsource that. They have accommodation finders. They have agents who will find accommodation that is suitable for your family. So if you lost a 3-bedroom home, they'll find you a 3-bedroom home. And so they'll work with you, they'll find that accommodation, and then they'll just pay for it. The insurer will pay them. Whether the insurance company is required to do that, I think is a really good question that we should always have a look at. And I think it depends on the terms of the policy. I think that they should, but if they don't want to, then I would need to look at what the policy terms are and make the argument about here's why it's reasonable, in the circumstances that you should be finding the accommodation for this customer. But if somebody wants to find their own accommodation, if you want to live with family members, absolutely you're entitled to. But you don't have to sleep on the in-laws couch for longer than you can put up with it. You've got this additional benefit.
Absolutely. And then the second part of that question is, I think, around this idea that when it comes to assessing damage, you'll often get reports with widely differing amounts of money about how it will cost to fix property.
Yeah, I don't know. It costs what you get charged. It costs what you're going to pay for it. But I think the most important thing to think of there is, if you're taking a cash settlement, make sure that that cost is what it's going to cost you
to get it fixed. Remembering too that if it takes you 12 months to start the work, the cost is likely to have increased.
That's right. That's right. Get a builder's quote and get them to give you an amount of money now, and don't just guess.
No guessing allowed.
The last question we tagged to look at now was, what legal avenues, protections, etc. do renters have if they are displaced from their rental due to disasters or severe weather events?
I reckon the audience knows our answer to this one.
Tenants Queensland.
Tenants Queensland.
I think we might get Tenants Queensland to come and do
this
next year.
Yep.
And we're not saying that tenants, we don't know. It's a really important issue that affects people who are renting, and they do have rights. There are things that can be done. Should be done by the experts at Tenants Queensland. That's who we would go to.
Absolutely, we would.
Yeah.
There's a couple of minutes left of the webinar, no additional questions yet, so I'm just going to jump ahead and do like the information sharing. If people watching still have questions, you can still send them through. We've probably got time for one or two more, but I'm just going to skip ahead because we didn't get to Mo's case study. I'm sorry, we ran out of time. But we did want to just remind everybody what our free disaster legal help phone line is. So if you're supporting clients, or you know somebody who is needing some legal assistance after a disaster, they can call us on 1300 527 700. We've got a few other key phone lines for legal aid just to make you aware of. Our regular legal information line for people to call if they need legal help is 1300 65 1188. We have a priority phone line for First Nations people, so that's the 1300 65 0143 number there on screen, and those calls are answered as a priority. The last number there is for people who have questions about an application for legal aid that's already been submitted. That's the 1300 383 900 number. Just a couple of things before we wrap up for today. You can access a huge range of free legal information publications and just general information on our website. You can download those, you can order them for free, and they'll be delivered for free to your organisation. So please get online and have a look at the range of information that can be printed and viewed there, as well as several, probably hundreds of pages of information on various legal issues that you can read and download. And I think we're getting to the end of the webinar today. So thank you everyone for joining us. We do have webinars running monthly for our community legal education program. Next month's webinars will be looking at NDIS appeals, and we'll be advertising that soon, so look out for that one. I'm just going to double check we don't have any more questions before we wrap up. That's it. So
excellent.
A big thank you to Paul and Julie for sharing all of those case studies and your expertise today. We will follow up with the people who sent through individual questions that we haven't answered through the webinar. Look out for an email with a link to the YouTube recording of this webinar, plus the 2 handouts that are available for download. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.